8, I think, or 7 or 8. So, yeah, we're live, and we are here for another episode of the Educational Freedom Institute podcast, in conversation with your co-hosts, Matthew Nielsen, who is a founder, one of the co-founders of the Educational Freedom Institute and the current president of the board of the Educational Freedom Institute. And I'm joining Matthew, and my name is Corey DeAngelis. I am an executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. And today we're joined by a very special guest who is also affiliated with the Educational Freedom Institute. We have a whole EFI party going on in our discussion today. Dr. Terry Stoops, who is an advisory committee member at the Educational Freedom Institute. He's also vice president of research and director of education studies at the John Locke Foundation based in North Carolina. So we're going to talk a lot about a lot of the interesting stuff that has been going on in North Carolina over the last couple of months as it pertains to the reopening debate and special interest groups pushing to get rid of a private school voucher program serving, I think, over 12,000 students from low-income families in the state of North Carolina right now. So, Terry, without further ado, I want to thank you for coming on to our show today.
Well, thanks for having me, gentlemen. Aside from the hurricane approaching, I think everything's going pretty well here in North Carolina.
That's the least of your problems in 2020, though, right? A hurricane? No big deal. Cool. Well, thanks again. We appreciate you coming on. So, Terry, and our listeners know that usually we start off with the same question for our guests. And that is, if you could just tell us a little about yourself and what got you interested in education.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that got me interested in education was the fact that I didn't have choice growing up. I was stuck in the district school. There were no opportunities outside of that. And, once I learned about educational freedom, I got angry that I didn't have it. And when you don't have something that you find out later that you should have been able to access, then you get kind of angry, and then you start studying. And so I went to the University of Pittsburgh, got a master's degree from the Pitt School of Education, Administrative and Policy Studies, spent a short time teaching high school English. And then went off to UVA and got a PhD there. I've been at the Locke Foundation for 15 years. Co-founded a charter school here in North Carolina, the Carolina Charter Academy, the most obvious name charter school that no one thought of previously. So I co-founded that a couple years ago. And just so you know how all-encompassing education is in my life, my wife is a charter school teacher. I have my oldest is a career in tech high school here in Wake County, North Carolina. My youngest is at my wife's charter school. Both of my in-laws are teacher assistants. My sister-in-law is a teacher, and and her partner is a teacher assistant. So basically, every family conversation revolves around education. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Nice. Very cool.
Cool. So I want to dive right into the title of this conversation. Terry, I want you to give us a little bit of background on what the heck is going on with a couple of the teachers unions supporting a move to potentially aim to get rid of a private school voucher program in the state. So maybe if you could go over what this program actually is, who it serves, how it operates, and then what's going on with this call to strip, vouchers from low-income students, and what are the kind of dynamics behind that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the Opportunity Scholarship Program was previously litigated in 2014. And the North Carolina Supreme Court determined that it was constitutional. And the litigation basically revolved around the provision about funding education in North Carolina. When the program was created by lawmakers, they decided to fund it through the higher education budget to avoid some of those constitutional pitfalls. And we were fortunate that the case was found to be constitutional, and it became extremely popular. As you said, Corey, there were well over 12,000 students in the program right now. It is for low-income kids. About 49% of them are children of color. Median income for the program is around $31,000 per household. So we're talking about a low-income program that mostly around half of the children are children of color. It's extremely successful. It's extremely popular, and now a group headed by the North Carolina Association of Educators is trying to undermine it by suing on a basically a completely different, not a completely different, but a different set of circumstances. They are claiming that because they are excluded from certain private schools because of their religious beliefs or sexual orientation, that the program should be struck down. The significance of that is that the North Carolina Supreme Court right now has a majority that would actually be sympathetic to that argument, which is why they filed the lawsuit, is that they think that this time is right for them to get a favorable opinion from the North Carolina Supreme Court, because it's a court that's elected. And the Republicans in the past didn't do enough to secure those seats. And so now we have an unfavorable Supreme Court that very well may strike down this program. It would be a real shame for those 12,000, probably 15,000 kids, if you look at the kind of growth that we've had, going to be enrolled in this program for the current year.
What kind of? Oh, go ahead, Corey.
I was just going to say, this seems pretty odd that they're trying to argue to get rid of the program because they're saying that it discriminates on the basis of religion, whereas it actually doesn't, because you can apply for a scholarship and you're rewarded a scholarship regardless of your religious identity or sexual orientation, of the student or their parents. So the program doesn't discriminate on the basis of religion. And what's really interesting here is that this comes right after the Espinoza decision at the U.S. Supreme Court, that Montana recently struck down one of their private school choice programs on the same basis, because the funding could go to families to use to attend religious schools. And so it seems like that precedent, even if North Carolina is successful and these unions are successful in nixing the program, it seems like the clear precedent in the Supreme Court right now is that they wouldn't, that would be overturned. What do you think about that, Terry?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and I hope so. This would be something that I would hope that if it did get to the North Carolina Supreme Court and there was an unfavorable ruling, that the federal courts would intervene and overturn it. But you have identified a fundamental flaw in their argument, is that not only does the program not discriminate. Sorry, my lights go out every once in a while. I'm going to be doing one of those every, just to wave it off. Not only does the program not discriminate, but it is not as if all private schools who participate in the program discriminate. If they find that there's one school that they can't go to, there are plenty of other schools that would be open to their to admitting those students. And the truth is the number of participating private schools that would turn them down on a basis of religion or sexual orientation is very small. And so this is, in essence, basically a complaint about small conservative Christian evangelical schools rather than all the schools that participate in the program. So I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, we are now just starting to get that legal defense wound up. This lawsuit came as a little bit of a surprise in its timing. And what we are trying to do right now is to make sure that there's no injunction in the program, that there is no effort to try to prohibit students who received a scholarship this year from being able to participate in the program. So that's sort of where we're at right now. I give a shout out to Rebecca, who is a school choice champion here in North Carolina. She's one of these passionate parents that are going to make sure that the stories of parents who have kids that are not only participating in an opportunity scholarship program, but can't access our private school voucher programs get heard.
So speaking of that, I assume that she and other parents are jumping all over this, right? Because there's got to be some kind of grassroots effort. I'm sure there's a grassroots effort to counter the narrative, right? And are you aware of anything going on, Terry?
Well, Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina is the organization that really works with the grassroots, and they have this fantastic video that I highly recommend that everyone watch, because they talk to an opportunity scholarship parent. It's a single parent of 2 African-American boys. And they ask her, what does this mean? What does this program mean to you? And she's very heartfelt about it. Then they show her a clip of our governor, Democrat Roy Cooper, talking about how he wants to get rid of the program. And she starts to get angry because what Cooper is saying is that the program has no accountability and that parents are not a sufficient accountability measure. And he gets angry because she said, it's accountable to me.
Boom.
Exactly.
Yeah, as if the public schools are accountable to the parents and you can't leave them. Come on.
So
you brought up Roy Cooper, so I have to bring something up on this thing we have called the School Choice Hypocrisy Map at the Educational Freedom Institute website, where we track politicians who exercise private school choice for their own kids by sending their own children to private schools, and then turn around and make arguments like this, arguing that the schools aren't accountable. Well, then how did you ensure that your child's private school was accountable, Governor Roy Cooper? It's because he can take his child elsewhere if they're not actually accountable. And it's interesting that Roy Cooper, in a similar video, I don't know if it's the video you're referring to, but he said that there's no accountability mechanism whatsoever from the state. But in North Carolina, in this program, you have to administer some type of norm reference standardized test, right?
Yep.
And I think you also have to report graduation rates or something, if I'm thinking of the correct program. But more importantly, the schools are directly accountable to the parents.
That's right. And we asked on occasion Roy Cooper to comment on the fact that his daughter went to St. Mary's School, which is an extremely expensive school here in Raleigh. He of course has not obliged at this point, but it is sort of the tip of the iceberg with the Democrats, because there are plenty more than just the 2 that you identified that have some hypocrisy. But, on the other hand, there are some Democrats that do support the program because they understand that this is a lifeline for low-income children, especially for children of color. So while Roy Cooper's getting ready to want to get rid of the program, we have plenty of other Democrats here that are really champions for the program. And I just wish they had they were a little more vocal about what's going on in their own party and their own party's desire to try to get rid of the program.
Joel Ford's one of those, isn't he, Terry?
Absolutely, yes. Former legislator Joel Ford, former legislator Marcus Brandon, who is the head of Carolina CAN. We have Cecil Brockman, who is in the legislature right now. We have some really strong leadership, especially in the African-American community, who are trying to get through to some of their colleagues and former colleagues and just have been unable to do so because they're beholden to the North Carolina Association of Educators.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole fight to get rid of the program is they're trying to make it about some constitutional argument, but as we've already went over, there's no legitimate constitutional argument to get rid of this program. It does not discriminate on the basis of religion. You're more likely it's a better argument to say not having school choice discriminates on the basis of religion if you think about it, since the public schools are not allowed to have any religious affiliations at all. But I think it becomes even more clear that this isn't really about a constitutional argument. It seems to be more about power and preserving the public school system and protecting a monopoly. Because when you look at like the press release coming out, filed by the teachers unions, a lot of their main arguments here is they argue that public funds should go to public schools. That's not a constitutional argument, and they're just arguing, a lot of, if you look here, quote from their leader, vouchers for private schools are an affront to a state that has a long cherished history of public education. What does that have to do with a constitutional argument? It seems to be more about protecting the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that history includes segregated schools for decades. So, it's not an illustrious history of public schools in North Carolina. So yeah, I mean, this is part of the frustrating propaganda that we're inundated with. Let's talk about market share for a minute, because this is really why they're concerned, is that our public school population is decreasing ever so slightly, while charter school population is increasing significantly. Our homeschool population, of course, is huge and increasing every year. Our private school population, not so much. But because of our private school voucher programs, they're seeing a little bump year after year. So as far as a market share, 21% of parents have their children in a school of choice. It's probably more than that if you count magnet schools. And the market share for the districts are diminishing. And that's what they're afraid of. They're seeing parental choice in action, and they're worried that as their market share decreases, so does their share of the money, and so does the union share of the teacher money, as more teachers opt to teach in charter schools and private schools, or even homeschool their children.
Go ahead, Corey.
I want to point out really quickly for the listeners, on the homeschool front, North Carolina seems to be the state that had the highest percentage of homeschoolers, about 7 to 8% of the school age population. By a lot. Second place, Arkansas, is less than half, 3.7% of their population homeschools. So do you have any insight as to what is different about North Carolina on the homeschool front? Is there, like, I don't know, more stringent reporting requirements? Maybe it's picking up more people that way, or maybe it's just people love freedom in North Carolina. I don't know.
I think we're just a great state. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah. No, this is organic growth. This is growth in homeschooling from non-traditional populations. For the longest time, homeschooling in North Carolina was identified with evangelical Christians. Now, folks from any number of faiths, no faith at all, in fact, are looking at homeschooling as a fantastic alternative. One of the things I think that really drew people into homeschooling was a few years ago, we spearheaded an effort to change the homeschooling law in North Carolina to be more inclusive of online learning and of co-ops. And so while those things were allowed under the law, they could always be kind of held as suspect, because the law really suggested that almost all of the instruction needed to come from the parent. There was a change in the law, and that law made it clear that only a majority of the instruction needed to come from the parent, and it really welcomed these alternatives. And I think parents really embraced that. We have some great organizations in North Carolina that's extremely helpful to folks that want to get to start homeschooling. Some really grassroots organizations that have been around, like North Carolinians for Home Education is one that comes to mind. That really take an interest in individuals trying to homeschool. So I think that is one of the reasons why we have an estimated 149,000 homeschoolers in North Carolina. And let me tell you something, the sky's the limit as far as this upcoming year, because those parents are breaking websites.
Good timing, right when I pulled it up.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's nuts that for people who didn't hear about this a couple of weeks ago, right? Early July, or like a month ago, so many people were going to, in North Carolina, you have to do a notice of intent, I believe, on the government website. And so many people were doing that, crashed the website. It's just amazing. And why do you think that is, Terry, that so many people are, even more than usual, seeking out homeschooling this year?
One of the reasons is that Governor Cooper spent so long deciding how he was going to order the state to respond to the school reopening issue, is that parents got frustrated and scared and said, forget it. I'm not waiting any longer for the governor to make his decision on how schools are going to reopen. And then some of the plans that the schools proposed were absolutely senseless. And so they cut through the nonsense and said, rather than trying to see what the government is going to do, what the governor is going to do, what school districts are going to do, I'm just going to take it upon myself to start homeschooling my child. And it's easy enough. I mean, the notice of intent, even though that the website crashed, is fairly easy and straightforward to fill out. You get to name your school like Jedi Academy. I always appreciate the homeschoolers that call it Jedi Academy. That's bold.
That's good.
That's Jason Bedrick level right there. So it's extremely easy, and parents went online and they got encouragement from those homeschool organizations and groups that would guide them through each step of the way. And they said, we did this in the spring, we can do it now. And so they broke the website. Now, I will say this. Some people say that there were nefarious things behind it, as if the government was trying to prevent people from filing a notice of intent. I don't think that's the case. That's an office with 2 or 3 full-time people. Mm-hmm. They oversee the 103,000 students that attend private schools, 149,000 homeschool students. I think they're just an understaffed and so they got the website up in about 6 days. So I don't think there was anything nefarious behind it, but it does tell you what kind of overwhelming interest there was in homeschooling. And, you think about it, we're going to probably see 10, 15% increase in homeschooling this year. We won't know the numbers for sure until the end of the school year. Even though I'm gonna try to get them early, we'll see what I can do.
So wasn't it around, I can't remember, for some reason 22,000 comes to mind. Weren't there that many applications? Was that right? Yeah, it is.
We're thinking the same thing, Matthew. Check it out. I already had it pulled up.
That's 22 right. In 4 days. That's insane.
Well, yes, we have, this is the interesting irony, is that school districts set up their own virtual school with no limits to the number of students that can enroll. But we have 2 virtual charters that say, we're gonna cap each of those. And we have had so much from Democrats, from the legislature, from the members of the State Board of Education, talk about how terrible our virtual charter schools are. Haven't said a word about the virtual schools that were set up by our districts. So we have, at this point, looking at school reopening in North Carolina, over half of North Carolina students are going to attend some sort of virtual school or full-time remote learning option provided by their district or their charter school. So that's kind of where we at from. We went last year from hating virtual options to this year enrolling half the kids in them.
So right. wasn't there what was it, just last year? Didn't the legislature vote to expand the enrollment caps at the virtual charter schools?
They did, and the reason why they had to do it and not through our State Board of Education is because a few years ago, our State Board of Education refused to even entertain the idea of a virtual charter school. And so they would not look at the application for the school. And instead, the legislature had to charter it. And then they renewed that charter. So it was a different time under a different governor and State Board of Education that refused to even entertain the idea of that charter application. So it was done through the legislature rather than through the State Board of Education, which tells you all you need to know about how they felt about virtual charters in North Carolina.
And North Carolina still has those caps, though, right?
We still have the caps. Yeah, there's a little more room, but I tell you, probably both of those virtual charters could double their enrollment if they were allowed to.
And so you only have 2, and statutorily it's limited to 2. Yeah. Isn't that correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the Senate and the House passed a bill that would have expanded the caps, I believe, last year. Cooper vetoed it, and I don't know. I think he laid out some arguments as to why he did that, but I don't think any of them were any good.
They're not. They're usually not. He vetoes everything he can, and unfortunately, the Republicans in the General Assembly don't have the supermajority that they once had to override those vetoes. So while there was a small allowance for the school to be able to grow in this upcoming school year, it's not due to the General Assembly.
I want to bring up another thing that happened last year with some trainings that I'll just bring up the tweet because it was pretty ridiculous. It led to the person deleting their account, but this was supposedly, I think we've had enough confirmation that this person was training principals in North Carolina, in particular Guilford County Public Schools. And this is what they were kind of advocating for. They admitted on Twitter that they included in their trainings to burn books because the existing books in the school system, they argued, were using white history, white mathematics, and white science. And so she was training principals to literally burn the books.
Most books, by the way.
Just no.
Yeah, you must have some insider information on this, Terry. What's your take on it? And is there any updates on this situation? I know this kind of happened last year and it blew up on social media, but
no, that it's I still see that sentiment often, especially on the Facebook groups that a lot of these teachers inhabit. They one recently, and I had this posted on our locker room blog at the John Locke Foundation. She asked other teachers, which book should I get rid of? She was working in a school library, and it was along the lines of which books are most problematic, or which, Dr. Seuss was canceled, so get rid of all the Dr. Seuss, get rid of some of the other books that have been canceled along the way. And that's what she was asking fellow teachers about, is to provide her a list of books that she needed to get rid of. Now, to the credit of a lot of teachers saying, listen, it's not about getting rid of books, but it's about adding books. Go figure that's the case. But, this is also reminds me of our social studies standards, which were paused recently because members of our State Board of Education said that they were not representative enough, and they didn't have enough representation of communities of color. This is a situation where we're looking at getting rid of things, replacing them with other things, and it started with that tweet, and then you have teachers that have undergone similar trainings. And it goes with an activist State Board of Education who now wants to completely upend our social studies standards. So we're seeing a lot of upheaval here in North Carolina. And our kids, let me tell you something, they could use a lot more history. My wife is a social studies teacher. And the story that I like to tell about why we started our charter school and implemented a core knowledge curriculum was that she was a 7th grade social studies teacher. And she would have kids coming into her classroom that didn't know the continents or the oceans. And she's just like, wow, where do I start as a teacher? If I'm teaching 7th grade social studies and these kids don't know the continents, they can't identify oceans or large land masses, something is deeply wrong. And so rather than trying to think about what knowledge kids need the most in our school system, we have trainings like that, and we have efforts to try to dumb down the curriculum rather than to really try to enhance it with as much core knowledge material as we can get. And I mean core knowledge sort of in a general sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the debate on reopening going? I've heard most recently that Cooper had an announcement about, districts can choose. Are you seeing that districts are just saying, no, we're just going to do the virtual thing? I mean, I don't know anything deeper into what's going on in North Carolina besides that.
The governor had planned on announcing on July 1st what his plan was going to be, and then the night before he said, "I'm not going to announce. I have to confer with stakeholders," which means he had to talk to the North Carolina Association of Educators a little longer. 12 days later, he came out with his plan that would give districts the opportunity to choose one of two options. They could go full-time remote, which is Plan C, or they could choose a Plan B, which includes moderate social distancing, or they can choose a combination of the two. They can offer plans for remote learning and social distancing, or one or the other. A lot of schools started out saying that they were going to go with this plan B, that they were going to have kids come in shifts. They were going to have different types of arrangements for kids, and then give as many parents as they wish the option to go with a full-time remote plan. The North Carolina Association of Educators started putting pressure on school districts to get rid of any sort of plan for in-person instruction and go to a full-time remote plan. And that actually happened 2 days after the governor's announcement in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, which is our second largest district in North Carolina. And then the school districts and charter schools started falling like dominoes, opting for this full-time remote plan. So now we have a few of our mid-sized, smaller districts that are holding on, and charter schools that are holding on to a plan B, which is a moderate social distancing plan that has in-person instruction. But there's been a significant wave of districts choosing the full-time remote because there's a choice either, and this is the choice that teachers have put in front of school boards. If you don't go with full-time remote learning, then kids and teachers will die. That is the pitch that we're hearing from a lot of teacher advocates out there.
So, but you said you're seeing different responses from the charter sector that you are from the traditional public schools. Do you have a theory as to why that may be, why there's a different response from the charter schools as opposed to the traditional schools?
Well, charters are close to the parents, and they're only dictating policy for one school, and that's really powerful as opposed to a district where some of our districts are mandating policies for 150 schools. So when you can get down to that level and understand parents at the school level and not have to make policy for giant bureaucratic districts, I think that makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And the charter schools are able to respond to the needs of the parents much better than these huge districts are. And let me just remind folks, for people that don't know how it works in North Carolina, we have, for the most part, county-wide districts, which means we have some massive school districts. Wake County schools having 160,000 kids. Wake County is where I live here in Raleigh. And we have a few city school systems, but for the most part, they're county-wide. So we're talking about policies being made for multiple schools across an entire geographic area that might be huge. The weather in one part of a county is different than the weather in the other part of the county. Yet when you make a policy for them, they all have to close or they all have to open. It's not a really smart way of doing things.
And it covers wide demographic, wide spectrum of demographics, right? I mean, in some cases, in Wake County in particular, well, in CMS as well, you've got the entire spectrum, right? I mean, a whole county can contain, and does. I mean, I'm thinking specifically about those two, CMS and Wake County. Both of them, you have very, very low income families that rely on schools, for instance, we've talked about it here before, Corey and I, for food. Right. Yeah. I mean, kids go to school in some cases for lunch to get any food. And then you have others where we've talked about in recent weeks where families are saying, okay, well, if you're not going to open in person, I have a life, mom and dad have a life, and we're going to hire in a teacher and maybe ourselves, or we're going to get together with some other families and do that. And you have those same two families and in the same school district, but you have one policy or maybe a plan B and a plan C, but no plan A and no plan D or whatever, right? I mean, you have one policy.
You need plan A plus, which is give the money to the families and let them decide, because there's all those differences. I think that's what you're getting at.
Right.
Terry, I want to see if there's anything like this going on in North Carolina. So this is from the Milwaukee Teachers Association. They started putting together tombstones, and for the listeners who cannot see what's on the screen, they're holding up a tombstone that they made that says, and it's a fake tombstone, Here lies a third grade student from Green Bay who caught COVID at school. So it seems like they're doing a lot of protesting and using imagery and a lot of morbid imagery to protest the reopening of schools. Have you seen anything like this in North Carolina? I mean, we're seeing this in Milwaukee. We're seeing it in some other big cities. But I just hadn't heard anything from North Carolina.
No, they're saying things like that a lot, but no tombstones, no body bags, no Grim Reapers, not yet, at least. Plenty of signs out there that talk about the fact that it's a life and death decision. But we're not there with the theatrics. Perhaps give it time. I don't know.
No writing of obituaries or anything like that.
Arizona had that, yeah.
But there's a lot of talk about, especially a lot of chatter online about talking and getting your will done, and discounts for getting a will done. So
for teachers, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up the thing from Arizona, but what Matthew's alluding to is in Arizona, they had Arizona Educators United, I believe is the name of the group. Right. And they actually gave the teachers a Google Doc with a bunch of resources. And one of them was, it's kind of hard for me to talk and type at the same time, I bet. But one of them was a template of an obituary. And they were telling their members to write obituaries and send them to the governor. And I think that's happening today.
Yeah, I think it was yesterday, actually. I think Sunday was and then I think today is the death march, isn't it?
Well, yeah, so they said to write it yesterday, and then today they're doing their quote unquote Ducey's death march to the Capitol. They're going to bring all of their signs with their fake obituaries and fake epitaphs. You're pretty lucky over there in North Carolina, Terry. You haven't seen these kind of tactics. I want to get your response to this. So if you could check it out real quick, what's your quick response to these types of calls in other places?
Well, this is reminiscent of what we saw last year. We're Red for Ed state. We had a protest in 2018. We had a follow-up protest in 2019. And among the demands in 2019 were things like Medicaid expansion and $15 minimum wage. So that's what this reminds me of, is the fact that we have these kind of demands that are coming from our Red for Ed folks that are in charge of our North Carolina Association of Educators. Now, they don't want to ban new charter schools just yet, but they do want to ban private school choice. Standardized tests, these are all things that there's a lot of chatter about. None of them have made the official list of things that the North Carolina Association of Educators wants to get rid of. But just give them time. They're already working on trying to get rid of private school choice. They know charter schools to be a threat. So I fully expect if there's a Democratic majority in the General Assembly come fall, that most of those things will come to fruition here in North Carolina.
Actually, here's one that I just found. I pulled it up on Washington Examiner. Actually wrote about this a week ago. North Carolina teachers unions demand support for undocumented immigrants, more funding to reopen schools. So it looks like they're not all teachers unions in North Carolina, but some of them are calling for income for undocumented immigrants, which just it doesn't seem like it has a lot to do with safety of reopening the schools. And it seems like, they're just kind of calling for other things that they prioritize politically.
Yeah, that was the head of the Durham Association of Educators. It's one of the more radical wings of the North Carolina Association of Educators. And so this was picked up by the Center Square. I think my friends from the Civitas Institute are quoted in there. And this is typical fare from that specific chapter of the NCAE. They are the more the radicals of the group. And given that North Carolina is such a big state, you know, it's interesting to see things like this from the Durham Association of Educators that would never, ever even be thought of in other NCAE chapters and in other parts of the state. So they do have a diverse membership, and it's a small membership. This is why I like to remind people is that their active membership is around 17,500 and change. We have 94,000 teachers in North Carolina. So the idea that they're somehow representative of our teacher workforce is absolutely false. They are a small group of loud teachers that don't really have much say, or don't have as much say as they used to in North Carolina, and certainly don't have the numbers that they've used to.
Is there a competitive organization to them, or is that it? It's just NCAE and everybody else?
There are two other teacher organizations, the Classroom Teachers Association and the Professional Educators of North Carolina, that are smaller, less radical organizations that attract a few thousand teachers. They're by and far the largest, but their numbers are decreasing. In fact, our NCAE chapter has had some of the largest decreases in membership of any NEA state affiliate in the nation, even though they've been a red for ed state and have been staging walkouts for the last 2 years. It hasn't helped their membership numbers at all.
Is that since Janus, or just does it precede that?
It precedes that. They've been bleeding members for a very long time, and that doesn't make me sad. Let's just put it that way.
So Terry, back on that the lawsuit that the teachers unions are supporting to end the voucher program for low-income students, I just saw that the president, and for anybody that's seen like the difference in the lighting for me over here, it started raining here in DC. Usually there's a bunch of sunlight coming in, so that's why there's a change. But the president of the largest teachers union in the United States, which is also the largest labor union, period, in the United States, their president, Lily Eskelsen Garcia, commented on this push to get rid of the private school choice program for low-income families in North Carolina. And here's her commentary. And I want to get your thoughts and reactions on what she said. But she said, unfortunately, vouchers do nothing more than starve already scarce funding from the public schools that 90% of North Carolina students attend, and give them to private schools that are unaccountable to parents and taxpayers.
Yeah, standard fare, really. I mean, that's what we hear. First of all, it sounds like a generous number as far as market share goes, and one that includes charter schools. It's funny how they'll include charter schools when it sounds like it benefits them in those counts. But regardless of that, we have been fortunate in North Carolina to have a wonderful series of studies done by NC State, Anna Egalite and her team, talking to parents, looking at the private school landscape, looking at student performance, and none of their reports fit that characterization. And that's sort of the interesting part about hearing remarks like that, is that we have this series of research that NC State has published, really fantastic work by Anna and her team, asking parents, why do you want to go to this school? Why do you want to opt out? What are the particular circumstances? Do you monitor your kids' grades more now that they're at this private school? And you find almost universally that parents are more involved in their kids' education, that they make the decision based on the right reasons. They're not going to join athletic teams. They're going to ensure that their child has a quality education or avoids being maltreated in a district. One of the reasons why we really need school choice is so that kids get out of unhealthy situations like that. Mm-hmm. We know that students are performing better. We know that private schools are happier. We know that private schools are recruiting these students to their schools in order to have a more diverse student body. I mean, we have a great series of findings from NC State that really contradict all of the propaganda we're hearing from the NEA and the teachers unions.
Yeah, and I just want to add that it's important to know what you laid out earlier, that the average household income that these children are coming from is about $30,000, which is lower than the average household income in North Carolina. So it's a low income targeted program. I just wanted to bring up one of the reports that Terry mentioned, just so you know, he's telling you legit evidence. This is the only peer-reviewed publication on the topic of the Opportunity Scholarship Program in North Carolina and its effects on student outcomes. This was published this year, 2020, by Anna Egalite from NC State University. And here's from the abstract. Our preferred specification examines first-year effects for new students, revealing positive estimates of about a third of a standard deviation in math and 44% of a standard deviation in language. And so these are positive effects. It's not an experiment per se, but it is the most rigorous study that you guys have on this program in North Carolina, finding positive achievement effects. And then, like you said earlier, I mean, these schools are directly accountable to the parents. If they don't like the school, if the school's not serving them, they can go elsewhere. And then, you know, to respond to Lily, additionally, is that this money doesn't belong to the schools. It belongs to the students. It's for educating the kids, right? It should follow them to wherever they're getting an education.
That's right.
In North Carolina, a lot of the money stays in the public school even after the child leaves with the voucher. The voucher is only worth like 44% of what they would have gotten in the public school system. And the public schools aren't only funded based on enrollment counts, so they end up with more money per pupil left behind. So it's just total baloney. Just seeing this case, you know, unfold in North Carolina, and hopefully the judges, you know, rule on the side of the low-income families. Do you know of any timeline that's expected with this, Terry, and the case?
No, we're trying to see that the lawsuit was filed, but it hasn't been calendared yet, according to our intel. So we're kind of getting a sense. We suspect that they're going to try to fast track it to the state Supreme Court. So we know that is going to be one of their priorities. But as of right now, we don't have any information about sort of where it's going to be on the court calendar, which has been a little bit of a mess because of COVID-19. So that might delay it further. But we're going to have a vigorous defense. We're going to have fantastic attorneys from the Institute for Justice of Justice Action Center. We have a full team that we're assembling. We have parents that are going to be outspoken about the program and about the benefits that came from it. And so we're not going to let this go down without a fight. And if there's one thing that I can tell you, that these parents are really passionate about this program. They fought for this program, and they'll fight every inch that they can in order to make sure that it stays.
Well, and this is, you know, this is what's so important here, right? Like the fact, I don't know how you argue against something like this, and you're so disingenuous. You've just got to be, right. You've just got to be so disingenuous, knowing what the facts are. We have the facts on our side, that the money should follow the student, that school choice benefits families, that when families are given choices, they tend to make, on the whole, great decisions for their kids. And this is what we do at EFI, right? So we take all of that data, all of these results that Anna got and her team at NC State, and we push it out to the public. And we make it maybe a little more digestible. Maybe we post an op-ed, we publish an op-ed on it. Maybe we make a little graphic or something, put it on the website. That's what we do at EFI. We put the rubber on the road so that it's digestible for people. Yes, the research is important, and thank goodness we're in a sector in a research area where the data is on our side, and we can take that and push it down to people where and hopefully change public opinion. Because right now the unions, I mean, they've got, you know, the NEA as of 2018, they took in $392 million. So and that's just the national level, by the way. Local, you know, state level gets some factors, you know, I don't know. It's like a factor of 4 or 5. I don't know. It's huge though. They've taken a ton of money. So we don't have the financial resources that they do, but the facts are on our side. So we appreciate your help on this stuff, keeping us abreast of it, Terry, and making sure we know where to point our efforts. But anyway, there's my soapbox.
No,
Corey.
I wanted to point out real quick what you first started talking about is truly an interesting scenario where you have people fighting to protect a monopoly system, and then they sometimes come out and say that they're doing it to help the children from these families who are voluntarily using the program, that voluntarily pulled their children out of the public schools that were failing them and sending them to private schools. And so the other side is stuck in this weird predicament to where they're trying to make the argument that taking away this option from these low-income families is somehow helping them, as if they
know better.
Yeah,
they do, right? I mean, of course they know better.
And this is something that you always talk about, Corey, on Twitter, because, like everyone, I'm a fan. But we have a huge pre-K program that's built on choice for low-income individuals to be able to take that money to any pre-K center in the States, regardless of its religious affiliation, and use it. In the same way, we have the Pell Grants and student loans that allow college students to take money, public money, to private religious universities. We have these programs, these robust choice programs at the start and at the end of education. And now we're trying to fill in the middle in that K-12 space. And all we see is resistance. And so,
why is it different? Why is it different, Terry?
It shouldn't be. It absolutely shouldn't be. And, it's that's what's frustrating, I think, for a lot of us school choice champions, is that it shouldn't be different. Just the parents in the K-12 system would have just as much value in a school choice program as they did when they were trying to find their child a preschool and their college student a university. The fact is that the amount of money involved, I think, of course, the special interest groups and all of those factors are playing a role in trying to ensure that those in the middle in that K-12 system have as few choices as possible. Well, I like to think of us, I mentioned Star Wars earlier. We're the Rebel Alliance. We're going to be victorious. We're going to destroy the Death Star. Give us a little bit of time.
Star Trek or Star Wars, Terry?
Star Wars. Did I say Star Wars?
He said
no. I'm just asking. Star Wars or Star
Wars,
Trek?
Baby.
Star Wars, baby. Yeah, I mean, there's only one way I can bridge that apparent disconnect in logic as to why you would support Pell Grants and pre-K programs, but not K through 12 vouchers, which is the same thing. It's just different time period. Is because relative to the status quo, allowing people to choose in the K through 12 system is a threat to a monopoly system. You have a special interest that currently gets the money regardless of the choices of the individual families. And so they fight really hard to keep it that way. Whereas in the higher education sector and the pre-K sector, the default is that families already have choices. So allowing the funding to follow the student, and that is not really much of a change. Whereas in K through 12, you have people kind of having tug of war over this money, and you have the establishment not wanting to let go of it by allowing families to choose where they send their children and where those education dollars follow the child. That's the only thing I can think of as to why there would be a disconnect in the logic there.
Well, I would add that there's an historical burden as well. The dirty secret, as trained as an education historian at UVA. And so if you look at our initial group of universities, they're not publicly funded universities. They're Harvard and William and Mary, and they're institutions that were largely founded as private institutions, and we've been comfortable with that. In the K-12 system, we have this mystique of all the founding fathers talking about how necessary publicly funded schools were to the preservation of the republic. Makes you wonder how we got through the 18th and 19th century. So we do have this historical burden here that we're dealing with, of this mystique behind a publicly funded system.
Well, and we can still have a publicly funded system, but have the schools be privately operated, like Milton Friedman called for. And I mean, look, it wasn't until 1852 that we had our first compulsory education law. So we could still fund education, just like we do with food stamps. We fund food for the least advantaged, but we don't have government running the grocery stores. That doesn't make. Why do we have government running our schools? It doesn't really make any sense to me, at least. I just want to call out a couple of comments that I think are pretty humorous that are showing up right now from Twitter. War is peace, slavery is freedom, public school is a choice. Give me a break. Being forced to attend a school just based on where you live is not a choice. That is akin to being residentially assigned to a government-run grocery store and not being able to choose where to take your food stamps. Give me a break. And here's one more by the same guy, Rob, giving you a shout out. If the USA has any intention to compete in a global economy, we need well-funded public schools. Who wants to tell them that the U.S. spends just about much more than most other nations in the world, and we get about middle of the pack when it comes to outcomes? Finland spends less than we do. Other countries that are outperforming us spend much less than we do. And we've increased per pupil expenditures in real terms after adjusting for inflation in the U.S. by 280% since 1960 and by about 40% since 1990 in the U.S. So funding doesn't matter if you don't have any incentive to spend that money wisely. Why don't we be more like Finland, to where we have a nationwide school choice system where people choose their schools? I don't want it to be a federal program, just to make that clear, but each state should allow families to choose their schools. So I had to respond to those because they were popping up really quickly.
So spoiler alert, Rob is my friend, and I told him I'd give him $20 to come up with the worst arguments against school choice. Just kidding. I don't know, Rob. But
I thought you
well
were
done, Rob.
For a second.
No.
One more study out of North Carolina before we get off. We've already come up to an hour, but I want people to check out this really recent study that came out by Andrew McEachen and his team from RAND, an independent research organization. They published this in Economics of Education Review. Came out a couple of months ago, June 2020. It's called Social Returns to Private Choice. And they look at the effects of charter schools in North Carolina on criminal activity. And they find reductions for students who attended charter schools. It was associated with reductions in criminal activity. And this is now the 6th study that we have linking school choice, either by charter schools or open enrollment or private school choice programs, to crime. And all 6 of these studies are peer-reviewed and find reductions. And so this is just another interesting outcome of school choice that I encourage more people to look at, because look, families are choosing schools for a lot of different reasons. And one of those things is character development and safety of the schools and the culture of the schools, which could lead to reductions in criminal activity later on in life. And that's just yet another study finding school choice reducing crime.
Yeah, and let me give a shout out to Dr. Doug Lauren. He's a professor at UNC Chapel Hill, really fantastic researcher. And he gave us a group that I was affiliated with, a little preview of some of that. And I think he'll have more to come here. So, we are pleased with our charter schools. You think about it too. Despite the growth of charter schools, and maybe because of the growth, the news just keeps getting better with charter schools in North Carolina. Academic performance is increasing. Those kind of non-academic outcomes are showing positive signs. And this is a real threat to the districts who for years have said that North Carolina's charters were inferior to districts. Now the evidence is showing otherwise, that charter schools are really outperforming districts and will continue, I believe, to outperform them even as they grow larger and include more students, including more low income and children of color.
And if they weren't outperforming them, why would so many families be choosing the charter schools voluntarily? I mean, it's a pain to opt out of your traditional public school and switch schools. Why would they be doing that if the North Carolina charter schools weren't serving them adequately? There's no good answer to that.
And there's more than non-academic or academic outcomes, right? I mean, you've got what you mentioned earlier, Terry, safety. And maybe environment, a different kind of environment is different to or a different motivator for different families. So yeah, there are a lot of things that go into that beyond test scores.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So we are up to 59 minutes and a half. And we told Terry that although we wanted to talk to him all day, we would cut it off and respect his time at 1 hour. Time has flown by yet again on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Terry, any parting words or where we could go to find, listeners could go to find your work?
Sure. Go to John Locke, LOCKE.org or CarolinaJournal.com. You will see the work of our Carolina Journal journalists and opinion writers, and johnlocke.org is our site that has all of our research.
Awesome.
Cool. So I recommend everybody go check out Dr. Terry Stoops there and follow him on Twitter as well. It's at Terry Stoops, correct?
That's right.
All right. Go check it out. And thank you so much, everyone, again, for joining us on In Conversation with Matthew Nielsen and Corey DeAngelis. And our special guest today, again, was Terry Stoops from the John Locke Foundation. Until next time, thank you so much again for joining us.